Now, all these reasons, taken together, seemed a strong case for secularizing the public order. This secularizing meant two very different things, one far less radical than the other. The first and less radical thing was freeing the state from any one particular religious allegiance, especially once Christendom split into different denominations. Thus, the non-denominational, but still generically religious political philosophy that we find in our own founding fathers. The second, much more radical kind of secularization was to free the state from religion as such, or even, most radically of all, from any answer to the first things question, even to the extent of a philosophical rather than a religious natural law morality. We find this radical secularization and the sharp aversion to the concept of natural law in our non-religious law schools today, and even in most nominally Catholic ones like Boston College. Students now joke that BC stands for barely Catholic. We should keep this distinction in mind because the validity of most of the arguments, both for and against the teleological state, depend on which form of it we have in mind. A narrow, denominationally religious state is simply impossible today because almost no one in America wants it. But a state without even a Tao or natural law and without any religion to support that law is equally undesirable, although most American intellectuals desire it. It is also self-destructive, if human history is any kind of reliable guide. It is not impossible to create one, but it is impossible to maintain one for very long, because it is contrary to nature, contrary to the nature of things, contrary to human nature. So at least goes the argument against the non-teleological state. Well, if this is true, then we have three and only three options for the future of the non-teleological society, that is, for the future of America. Especially if that society is not only religiously neutral and non-judgmental, but also morally relativistic. The first option is that this society will repent of its relativism. If this happens, that society will once again flourish, unless the Bible lies. The second option is that the society will persist in its relativism and perish. This, again, is a biblical prediction, a necessary cause and effect relationship. And the third option is that neither of these two things will happen, and therefore this society will refute the most certain and basic law in human history. It will thrive without any kind of natural law morality, with or without a religious basis, either narrowly denominational or broadly ecumenical. This seems to be the least likely option, unless, once again, the Bible lies. To explain this point, I here announce the formulation of what I call Colson's law, since I learned it from Chuck Colson. It is the law of the 4 C's: community, chaos, cops, and conscience. Since community and chaos are opposites, and since the only two ways to preserve a community from chaos are the inner cop of conscience or the outer cop of force, if you dry up conscience by a philosophy of moral relativism, it is inevitable that you get one of two things, either chaos or a police state. So any society that loses its Tao, any society without a grasp of first things, loses its second things, either its freedom or its life. A society of moral relativists necessarily self-destructs or turns into a totalitarianism. So the only secure hedge against totalitarianism is teleology. But all the influential modern Western political philosophers, with almost no exceptions, prefer the non-teleological state. Machiavelli, Bacon, Descartes, Hobbes, Locke, Hume, Rousseau, Comte, Montesquieu, Kant, Mill, Dewey, Rawls. Though they disagree deeply on metaphysics, theology, anthropology, epistemology, and ethics, they all agree on politics. They all support the liberal, democratic, rational, secular, neutral, pluralistic, non-teleological state, rather than the traditional conservative, faith-based, religious, committed teleological state that prevailed in both classical, medieval, and early modern eras. The non-teleologists have won. Either Kant's deontological ethics or Mill's utilitarian ethics has prevailed, not only in ethics, but in politics. The only three exceptions I can think of are Edmund Burke, the social encyclicals of the popes, and the aristocratic half of de Tocqueville's wonderfully split personality. Of course, fascism and communism are obviously not neutral and pluralistic. They are anti-religious totalitarianisms, but they are dead, except in some American universities. Even when they were alive, they were not philosophical. They were repudiations of the Western philosophical tradition. They were not ancient, but modern in spirit. Marx was a maverick Machiavellian, and Hitler was a maverick Nietzschean. Well, C.S. Lewis joins Burke and de Tocqueville and the popes. He calls himself a dinosaur. So let us bring him back into this political debate, though he did not explicitly join it in his lifetime. I think Lewis would offer at least 3 points in critique of the modern non-teleological state. These are at least the 3 points I have learned from Lewis. His first point would be that a contentless Kantian deontological ethics, a Rawlsian ethics, an ethics of mere golden rule, categorical imperative, justice, and equality, cannot work even for the individual and a fortiori for the public. As he argues simply and persuasively in Man or Rabbit, how can we do good to others unless we know what good means? If we work for others, in private or public, in ignorance of their true good, we may be blithely leading them to their destruction, like indulgent, non-judgmental, whatever parents allowing whatever spiritual garbage is in the air to be pumped into their children's soul via TV and internet, including pornography and violence. If morality is limited to the whatever justice of the golden rule, do unto others whatever you would have them do unto you, as it is in Kant's first formulation of the categorical imperative, then we can have no moral criticism of a society of freely contracting sadomasochists, consensual cannibals, or a universal orgy of free love, or even a society of suicides, as long as everything is free, equal, fair, and autonomous. The golden rule is only a whatever rule. Whatever you want others to do to you, do to them. Hey, if that's all you need, then let's party. A second point of Lewis's critique of the non-teleological society would flow from the fact that he is not a nominalist, but a metaphysical realist. He believes in real universals, including human nature, and therefore he would insist on an essential similarity, if not a perfect Platonic parallel, between the good for the human individual and the good for the human community. This must be true because human nature is the basis for both the individual and the social good. Both are human goods. And therefore, a Tao, a natural law ethic based on universal and unchanging human nature and true objective needs rather than felt subjective wants, is just as necessary for the state as it is for the individual. A third point, suggested by Lewis's dim view of modernity's rootlessness, is that it is inevitable that when only the logical form of morality is left, without substantive content, this naturally withers, because it satisfies only the logical and legal mind, not the human heart and life. And so the non-teleological society degenerates first into moral skepticism and then into moral relativism.